After setting up the microphone for our date and asking permission to record, I said, let's do a segment. It's called Rate My Dad. And then the following interaction ensued.
You have a good-looking dad.
Yeah, I know.
You have a good-looking dad.
Female friends tell me this.
Yeah.
Kind of a lot. DILF is a term I hear thrown around a lot.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't have to use that.
I think he has like an 8-pack. Like, this is crazy.
Yeah, he's pretty jacked. I'm aware.
This is insane.
And in that moment, a very small part of me died. Record scratch, freeze frame. You're probably wondering how I got here, and all will be revealed today in our TED Talk Gone Wrong titled Recording My Dates. This is, of course, the origin story of the Luke Needs a Date podcast, the podcast where I record my dates. This is coming to you in 5 parts. Part 1 is origin. So it all started when I went out on a date with a zookeeper. And during this whole date, I was just very fascinated by the zookeeping aspect. Like, conversation would die down a little bit and I would be like, tell me about the lions, the tigers, the bears. I was very fascinated by this. Like, what are your thoughts on Harambe? All of this. And then afterwards, I'm talking to my friend. We will call him T-Bone. And T-Bone was like, how was the date? And I'm like, it was good. However, I felt like a podcast host who was interviewing a zookeeper in a lot of ways. And this coincided with me and T-Bone had this inside joke where if we were ever on a date and we wanted it to end, we would just say, by the way, I've been recording this date for my podcast. And then she would get mad and it would be over. Bob's your uncle. This is how you get out of a bad date. And so once I said that it felt like interviewing a podcast, or that I felt like a podcast host interviewing a zookeeper, he was like, dude, that's it. And in that moment, we decided that I was going to turn my dating app profile into an advertisement where our first date would be recorded for a podcast. And immediately this was at coffee after church. So we said to the people kind of sitting down the table from us, we proposed this idea to them and they were all like, no way, that's dumb. You shouldn't do that. No one's going to go for it. And like Dr. Dre showing his relentless support for Eminem, T-Bone was like, you know what? I think you got to do it. And that gave me the confidence and inspired me. And I was like, you know what? I'm going to do it. Which brings us to part 2, full send. So let's take a step back and I'm going to give you my guide to podcast dates. Step 1, find a girl. We're going to take this as a given for now. Part 2, find a public location with no background noise. Not that big of a deal. We're not going to focus on that too much. But step 3, somehow make this not weird. That is really difficult because when you show up to a boba shop with podcast equipment, waiting for someone who you've never met before, who you're about to go on a date with, that's just inherently unnatural and awkward. And the only way to get through it is to fully commit, to just go full send. Otherwise, it's not going to work out for you. So this is an excerpt from my first date. And I would say this was the most uncomfortable part of this first date. So we were talking about putting the shopping cart back, and this was the interaction that ensued. It was not an entirely selfless putting the cart back. I will admit to that, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Yes. Let's see. So your
Do you
sister.
have like an entire list of questions?
No, I don't.
Okay.
There's nothing.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay.
No,
I thought
like
you just had this prep, and I was like, damn.
No,
okay.
I all I'm looking at is just making sure that like our audio waves are
okay,
still. That was rough, boys. So yeah, after the first few dates, and by we I mean like my friends who are kind of helping me come up with ideas for the podcast, we kind of determined that we needed a little bit more structure for the dates. So we decided to come up with some segments. So like Bruce Wayne training in the pit to eventually come out and save Gotham, we developed a few segments to save my podcast. The first one was, is it a red flag? This includes things such as he expresses a desire to asexually reproduce so that he can have a 2-on-1 advantage when he attacks people, or he carries a binder with him everywhere that's labeled my enemies and he asks you to pray for them. Another segment we had was Rate My Dad. You heard a little bit about that at the beginning. Developing role-playing games that are also personality tests, such as 24 Hours in IKEA. I really like that one. That one was a lot of fun. And then also some fake advertisements, such as for Dumpster Fire, Colorado Springs' hottest club. And eventually we got better. So here's an excerpt of a more smooth moment in a date from a podcast or from a segment titled Childhood Trauma Speedrun. Here you go. They had me answer the door for the pizza delivery guy wearing a fairy costume.
Incredible.
So I had to answer.
Did you have sisters?
No, I'm an only child.
Comes from?
I'm not going to answer that.
Okay.
So so I like dressed up in this fairy costume. It was kind of tight on me, and I just answered the pizza delivery guy as though this were completely normal.
That's hilarious.
Yeah. See, it gets better. And this brings us to part 3, controversy. So as I alluded to in the beginning, this podcast idea is pretty controversial. Like all those people, they were like, you shouldn't do it. I would not be surprised actually if this is my most disliked video, and that's okay. So first I'm going to preemptively issue a rebuttal, and then I'm going to show you some of the comments that I've gotten about this podcast. So I think that this podcast is actually really smart. First of all, it's fun. Like all of my dates, even if they haven't gone anywhere, so I have gone on second dates from this, probably like roughly half, a little less than half. I've asked on a second date and almost all of them have said yes. But regardless of if we went on a second date or not, it was still fun. It was still a lot of fun. And it's like, I don't know, dating before was just like kind of weird and awkward. And this just turns it into like worst case, it's a fun experience. And then a lot of people are like, you have a lot of episodes. Like I have 11 episodes out right now. They're like, you have a lot of episodes. You can't be serious about dating. And my rebuttal to that would be, I think it's fine to go on a lot of dates and still be serious about dating. Like the two are not mutually exclusive. And also it would be hilarious if I met my future wife on this podcast and you got to listen to our first date. I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm just saying that would be really cool. And that'd be like a cool story and something that I'm totally open to. So what I decided to do was to go on the Hinge subreddit, and they let you do these profile reviews. So I decided to put my podcast profile up for a profile review. And this did not go well for me at all. 61% of people downvoted. I'm not sure about the magnitude, but there were like a good number of comments and a lot of people downvoted to the point where it ended up with a net 0 total upvotes. So here are some of the comments. This profile is way too gimmicky to believe you're looking for something serious. Way too much podcast stuff. Looks like you're more interested in content than finding someone serious. Podcasters just scream, I have no tangible skills to contribute to society, so let me just buy a mic and hook it up to my laptop. There's another one titled, looks like a profile made for a YouTube video titled, Podcasters Can't Get Dates. And I actually would use that title, except I don't think it's very good. And then mysteriously, there was this comment from, let me kind of show you over here. There's this moderator who was like, and now the world knows how cringe he is, so mission accomplished. And someone was like, should mods be saying things like this? And then that last comment mysteriously disappeared. So very interesting. Obviously, this is a very controversial idea. I like it for the reasons that I described. But the moral of the story here for this part is that this is definitely not for everyone. This is going to bring us to part 4, how to get girls to agree to record your first date, or more like how not to, lol. So earlier, I was talking about, I pointed out that the first step is find a girl and that this is assumed. So we're going to dive into that assumption a little bit because it turns out it's actually kind of hard to get girls to agree. I mean, first of all, in general, like it's somewhat difficult to get girls to agree to a first date, and then to get them to agree to record that kind of adds another layer of complexity. So we're going to revisit this assumption and go through some of my rejections as well as some of my successes. So her prompt on Hinge, if you're not familiar with Hinge, you respond to prompts and then you can comment on them. So me saying, did you ever do DJ Hero? This is me responding to her prompt. And she's like, no, I haven't. Always wanted to, though. And just warning you now, if I go on your podcast, it'll be the last episode ever. Oh, dang, I got really good at it when I was younger. Why is that? Kind of missed the hint there. And she's like, well, ideally, it'll be your last first date. And I was like, wow, I was not matching your freak on that at all. Dang, that's bold. What makes you think you would crush it on a podcast date? It's a hard format. And then she responded with, oh, wait, no, she didn't respond to me. I got ghosted. And that was it. And yeah, so it's rough out there. My last journal entry was about soup. I said mine was about straws, but you don't see me putting that on my Hinge profile. And she's like, context, please. Also, really want to be on your podcast. This is a good sign, right? Like, to me, this indicates kind of straightforwardly that she wants to be on my podcast. So I was like, I feel like soup, like straws, is a sensitive subject, and people shouldn't just share that information with the world on their Hinge profiles. Guard your heart, Brooke. Brooke's out there, like, just, sharing anything with anyone. And then I'm like, also, normally I do more vetting, but you seem chill. So would you want to do a podcast this Saturday in the late morning at this place? And she was like, I would be honored. What time? I said, great, let's do this time. Please confirm whether that works for you. And I got ghosted. Run over his heart with a large truck. Okay, last rejection that we'll see. And then we'll go to some successes. So I was like, ha, 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 this is great. To her, Shark Boy and Lava Girl is a religious allegory comment. I'm going to steal this line at some point. How so? And then I matched with her. And she's like, I'll tell you on the pod. Good sign, right? We all agree it's a good sign. Oh, I bet we know where this is going. I'm like, best response. Are you free Sunday around 11? We could grab coffee and record. What kind of podcast equipment do you have? 4 days later, by the way. And then I'm like, 2 microphones. They're decent for recording in public spaces. Shocking, I know. And then I got ghosted. Harvest his organs, sell them on the dark web. It's brutal out there. Okay, so, but it's not all failures. I have 11 episodes out and a few more recorded that I need to edit. I just have like kind of a massive editing backlog. So I did get some girls to actually be on my podcast. Here's one of them. The best way to ask me out is by asking for my car's extended warranty. And I'm like, do you want to record our first date? And she's like, you know what? Bonus points. Let's do a podcast for our first date. Steph Curry from the moon. He shoots. He scores. That's how you do it, folks. This girl liked my profile about the podcast thing. She's like, I'm so down. And I'm like, that's great. What makes you think you can handle it? And she explained why she thought she could handle it. Words were exchanged. And eventually she was on my podcast. And boom, target neutralized. Let's go. He's a sniper king. Okay. So this is like the whole story of my podcast. And this brings us to part 5, where I'm going to give some of my final thoughts and reflections on this. First is a thought about self-efficacy. If T-Bone had not been encouraging me to do this podcast and I had only heard the voice of everyone who was like, that's a dumb idea, I probably wouldn't have done it. And so I think that's important because it shows the power of talking, how you talk to yourself and how others talk to you, and how that affects whether or not you actually think you can do something. And I actually had a really interesting conversation about this with Gwen, who was the 3rd guest on my podcast, my 3rd date. The other thing is that dating is just a very high variance endeavor. Like, there are situations where it seems like you totally got this, like it's going to happen, and then it just doesn't work out. And then there are other situations where it's like, there's no way this is going to work out, and then somehow it just does. So the moral of the story here is that you might as well be sliding into Dua Lipa's DMs. You know, what harm could be caused? No, but like, for real, dating is actually very difficult. You have to go through a lot of rejection, and yeah, I just experienced a lot of that. And for me, it's taught me, I'm still learning this, but it has gotten me closer to realizing that rejection is not defeat. And really, it's just like one step closer along the path that God has laid out for me, wherever that may lead, whether that's to marriage or to being forever alone. Yeah, and also just recognizing that there's legitimate hurt, and I shouldn't minimize that. Like, it's not just like, okay, that doesn't hurt me, I'm going to move on. It's like, no, it's okay to feel that hurt in rejection, but also recognizing, like, for me, that Jesus is there in my suffering, and that he suffered as well, and that suffering can be used to help us grow in our ability to love. So yeah, it's really difficult, and I think that there are a lot of things that can be learned from rejection, and that's certainly one thing that I've gotten out of this podcasting endeavor. Another interesting point is that oftentimes after a date, especially before I was recording my dates, I would think back to something I said and be like, oh my gosh, that was such a dumb thing to say. Turns out when you record your dates and I have that feeling, I actually would go back and listen to it, and it would not be as bad as I actually thought it was. So maybe the moral of the story here is that if you think you're sounding really bad on dates, it might not be as bad as you think. Granted, you're not recording your dates, so who knows? But at least for me, like, was the trend I tended to notice. And it's also helpful because recording your dates gives you cold, hard truth about what you actually sound like. And so if I actually did say something dumb, I couldn't minimize that and be like, oh, like, it wasn't that bad. Like, I would actually hear it again and be like, shoot, like, that was rough. And the final thing I have to say is that this was like such a cool experience. Like, I got to meet really cool people. Honestly, women who agreed to be recorded on their first date, legends. Like, such fun conversations. Even if, like, not every connection is meant to last, and even if I didn't go on another date with them, every person I talked to was super interesting, and I really appreciated the time that I got to spend with them. And also, like, it was just such a fun way to do dating in my own way. Like, it's fun, but it's hard. It's great in a lot of ways, but it sucks. But honestly, like, that's how life goes. Like, in the end, it's an adventure, and I really wouldn't have it any other way. So that, folks, is our TED Talk. If you liked this video, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Of course, listen to Luke Needs a Date on Spotify or wherever you listen to podcasts. And folks, remember that maybe the real date was the podcast that we made along the way. Thank you.